Welcome to another episode of Mystic-Skeptic Radio. On today's show, our guest is James G. Robinson. He's done and he's written a book about his
Sorry, David.
experience. Yes,
David, sorry to interrupt you, but like you're clipping out a little bit. I don't know if that's an internet connection thing or what, but
I don't know,
yeah,
but on this side is working well.
you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll ignore. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'll ignore you if it's
No, sometimes we record and then when I play it back, I'm choppy.
yeah.
So I don't know since I'm inside of the house and there's no internet issues. So.
Okay,
Uh,
I trust you.
oh, Thank you. Um, so, James, tell us about your book and what are you trying to get across through the different TED Talks and interviews that you've been doing lately.
Cool. Yeah. So my book is called More Than We Expected: 5 Years with a Remarkable Child. It was published 3 years ago. The website is morethan-a-memoir.com. And it's about our 5 years parenting a kid named Nadav who had a congenital heart defect that required three surgeries before the age of four. His life was an incredible gift, incredible privilege to be his father, even though it was short, um, because he died 9 years ago at the age of five. And after he died, I decided to take all my memories of his life and put it into paper and the hope that it would help other people in similar situations. And that's what it's done. So since it was published, it's reached people caring for kids with complicated medical conditions, families dealing with trauma, clinicians who have to push the limits of medical science to help these kids out. And it's been incredibly gratifying to see the resonance of our son's story amongst all these different communities. And what I've discovered along the way is that um, all sorts of people are interested in this work. Uh, I thought it would be about pediatric cardiologists and parents of kids with heart conditions. It's actually been much broader than that. Even, you know, medical chaplains are interested in our story because there's a lot of different angles on it. But my hope is that his life can help people not just cope with these traumas, but also see these situations in a different way. We were incredibly proud to be his father. Like I said, it was a privilege. Um, and I'm very grateful to have had that experience. And I think that's counterintuitive for a lot of people who hear stories like this to know that there's joy and wonder in addition to terror and fear. That's part of the reason I wrote it.
I hate to ask, I work with grieving families. My wife had a tragic death in hers. Has everybody in your family found redeeming aspects of this experience? Have other people struggled more and have gone to a darker place as they went through this?
One thing I've discovered is that everybody grieves differently. It's a very lonely path to walk. And everybody sort of has to wrestle with these things in their own way. Sometimes that means that you can't be as supportive as you want to be for somebody who needs to sort of figure things out. And that's okay. I mean, sometimes all you can do is just be there. But yeah, I do think everybody deals with this stuff in different ways, and and I think hearing other perspectives is helpful at times and not helpful at others. At times, people have given my book to people who are experiencing a loss, and it hasn't been the right thing for them, and that's fine. I think it's sort of a lonely path that you have to walk and navigate through, and eventually develop the muscles and the calluses to get through it.
So one phenomenon that usually occurs is that people who are grieving, they feel that their family, their colleagues are not capable or become unavailable to them at the time of grief. Um, I know there are some people who have great experiences, but it's very common for people to feel abandoned. Uh, do you see, like me, that most people are not equipped to provide grief support, and that it takes a whole team of specialists and people who are sensitive to that to be able to do the right kind of support?
It's hard to generalize. I think most people are well-meaning. Um, I think it's awkward because if they don't have a point of reference, it's hard for them to know what to do. We're Jewish. One of the interesting insights for us in the aftermath of our son's death was sort of going through the Jewish rituals of grief and mourning, and realizing, at least I realized, that although everything has a spiritual explanation, um, there's also very practical advice about it in our traditions. And one of the traditions is that you have to say Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, 3 times a day, and you're not supposed to do it alone. You have to do it with 9 other people present. They can be strangers, that's fine, but there just has to be other people there. And I actually found that to be a really useful obligation, because it meant that um, you had to force yourself to be around other people, which sometimes is difficult. Um, when you have the Shiva, the 7 days after the death, people are meant to come to the house, and they're not supposed to say anything until you talk to them. That's also a really great tradition. But sometimes you don't want to say anything at all, and it takes all the awkwardness and obligation out of having to make small talk with people who are just there to be with you. One of the things that happened is that I went back to work after he died, and a bunch of people at the company I worked at realized that Nadav's that was our son's name, that his name was Jewish, and they offered to arrange a minyan, a group of these 10 people for me every day, so that I could say this mourner's prayer in their company. And we worked in the Garment District in New York, which is a very Jewish area. There's a lot of synagogues around. And I said, well, you don't have to go to all that trouble because I was planning to go to a synagogue down the street. And they would say, they actually said, well, in that case, we're going to make sure you don't go alone. And so what they did is every day at around lunchtime, one of them met me in the lobby of our office and walked with me to the synagogue. And on the way, I would tell them our story, and they'd be in tears, and I'd be comforting them at the end. Kind of reversal of positions, but that obligation made that human connection real. And as a mourner, it's really important to know that there's goodness in the world. And there's something about being the parent of a kid in that situation when he's alive, when he's dead, that brings out the best in everybody. And that's actually, it's unfortunate it takes that sort of dramatic situation to bring that out, but it was quite meaningful for me to see it, the world at its best.
If you came across someone who was going through a similar experience, and it was end of life situation, what would be the words that would come out of your mouth to give support and comfort to that person?
Um, I actually think that language is awkward. The best gifts that people gave me was they tried to not put words to what they were feeling or connect with me. The most meaningful thing anybody ever did to me in our darkest time was to give me a hug. He didn't say a word, just gave me a hug. That's probably what I would do if I knew the person well enough to do it, and probably even if I didn't. Um, there's points in our lives where words are inadequate, but human contact, human connection are the most important.
I had a colleague at work, I work in pediatric chaplaincy, and we had a tragic death together, and they were doing a lot of back and forth, empathic conversation and validation of you're a great parent, you've done everything in your power, your kid knows that you're here with him. And I was just very quiet, and I was just waiting for the right time to help them process. And then at the end of the visit, my colleague said, "Is this your first death?" Because they were so uncomfortable with silence.
Hmm.
Um, so, as you have talked to doctors, chaplains, social workers, and other people in the field, have you seen is it like an American thing to always have something polite and helpful when, like you said, what you really need is someone who's side?
Um, I don't know if I'm qualified to weigh in on that, whether it's an American thing or not. I do know that talking about terrible things is a really difficult thing to do. When our son was born, I knew there was a chance that I would outlive him. And that's a terrible thing to know. But what I feared more than anything, even more than his death, was having to tell his 2 brothers that he had died. He had a twin brother and an older brother. And that obligation of telling that bad news was actually really, really horrifying to me. Um, and when the time came, after all we'd been through, I was able to do it. And I think the reason I was able to do it is because I realized that I could not explain it, that there are some things that are beyond our understanding. And so the only thing I could do is just tell them the facts without having to sugarcoat it or give an explanation to it or put in context, and trust their resilience to be able to deal with it. Kids are remarkably strong. I think people are remarkably strong if you give them the space and the support, the presence. I wouldn't say the support, the presence to know that they're not alone. I think that goes a long way in helping people heal. But of course, I only have had only my own experience. Um, you've encountered more people than that, so I'm always wary of giving advice because, for all I know, we may be terribly unusual people who do weirdly unusual things.
What's the weirdest thing you've done in kind of realizing the blessings and the pain that comes with?
The weirdest thing that I've done. I'll tell you a funny story about when we were sitting Shiva for our son. So um, one of the traditions is that when you're mourning, people are meant to show up. They're also meant to bring food. And we had a lot of family overseas who live in Australia who were not able to come, so they sent us food. And I remember the second or third day that we were sitting Shiva. I got a text message on my phone at about 11 in the morning that a delivery was on its way from Katz's Delicatessen, which, as you may know, is like the best pastrami sandwich in the world. And suddenly my stomach started rumbling because I was just incredibly hungry for this amazing pastrami sandwich. And I thought it was very thoughtful. They'd thought to send like a platter over. And when the box finally arrived, we opened it up and it was full of egg salad. That's all there was, just like 3 bowls of egg salad. And, and I felt really guilty that I felt disappointed because they'd made all this effort to send us something thoughtful and it shouldn't have mattered what it was. But at that moment, I was like, couldn't they have just ordered the pastrami? Um, so that's one of the moments where you just have to laugh because you're so miserable, I guess, that you have these emotions that sort of bubble over the silliest things.
Have you guys been part of any grief groups, counseling or support, networking things? I've met a couple of parents that they feel so alone. And I said, well, in America, there's support groups for anything. Maybe hearing from people who are going through the same experience might give you a little bit of perspective. Did you guys tap into that?
Yeah, it's when you have a medically complicated kid born with a heart defect that requires 3 surgeries, the first at only 5 days old, it really becomes part of your identity. You take on all these new skills um, that you never thought you would have, and then when the child dies, you've lost two things. You've lost them, but you've also lost that part of yourself. All the things that you've become when he was alive become, though they feel irrelevant and meaningless. And so you do want to be around other people in a context that makes you feel that is useful. We did go to some support groups, a few of them, not too many, but it was awkward because I think we were in a very unique situation. I remember vividly being in one parental support group of people who'd lost kids, and we were the only people who had known when our child was born that there was a possibility they would die. That when they were born with medical challenges. Everybody else had lost kids suddenly because of an accident or some other reason. And I remember them looking at us like unable to imagine the thought that when your child was born, you might have to lose them. To know that in advance, that was terrifying to them. They could not deal with that. And I looked at it the same way. I can't imagine losing one of your kids suddenly. That sounds to me the worst thing you could possibly imagine. So it was like the grass was always browner on the other side, right? Um, because we couldn't comprehend each other's loss. And I think every loss is unique and different. You can't comprehend what other people must be going through. For me, that's a bit of a blocker. Aside from the fact that there's other people who are dealing with similar things, unless it's like really, really similar, there's a bit of a gap between you. That being said, I have done like a lot of speaking and a lot of talking with people in similar situations since he died because of the book. I give a lot of talks, and those conversations are magnificent. It's wonderful to sit down with people who inhabit the same world and be with them and recapture that part of yourself that you may have lost when that loss occurred.
Have you ever come across people complaining about counselors that they're either not grief informed or that because they are only talking about it from book knowledge, that they will never understand, guide, or support someone who has had this raw experience themselves?
I can only speak for myself, and I've encountered a variety of therapists and social workers who have tried to help. And I don't think whether it's book knowledge or whether they've lived with something personally is a good predictor of how supportive they are. I think you just feel a vibe when you meet somebody, whether they're able to support you or not. And I think if there's somebody who's not able to support you, then it's easy to feel the obligation to continue with them because you feel bad that they're just it's not working out. But I think you have to sort of be candid and honest about what's helpful to you and what's not, because as somebody who's grieving, your energy is really limited, right? You don't have a lot to give all the time, so you have to be rather judicious about how you use that energy, certainly the emotional energy.
Has anybody brought up or complimented you like I did when I met you in person that because you're such a cool guy, it's easy to talk to you about this kind of stuff, but most talk to who are either experiencing grief, are in the process of anticipatory grief, knowing that their loved one is going to pass, that they shut down, that they close up, that they don't express their emotions. And then if they do, it's a shameful thing because it's a sign of weakness. And in both American and Mexican culture that I'm aware of, there's this idea that men shouldn't cry, men should be strong, men shouldn't allow other people to see them in a vulnerable state. Have you encountered that? Or, and also, what was your upbringing like that you have been so honest and real with people about your experience?
Well, well, thank you for calling me a cool guy. My two surviving teenage sons might not agree with you. They do not think I'm a cool guy. They do love me, but listen, this is one side of me. I'm not going to come on your podcast and cry. Like that doesn't serve anybody, but I do cry. Like obviously I cry. I think you have to cry. Um, and that's not easy to do, certainly as a as a as a person, but as a man to let those tears flow because you do feel it as a sign of weakness. You do feel it's a sign of failure. I do honestly believe that his life had joy and wonder and purpose, and I'll scream that anywhere that I can, right? But again, two things are possible to be true at the same time, right? It is also a terribly sad thing. And you do carry those two emotions around with you, or I do at least, everywhere I go. I will tell you, one person after he died came up to me and said something really profound, which has sort of stuck with me. And he said, in the weeks to come, he said, everybody's going to tell you to be strong. And I just want to let you know you don't have to be strong. It's okay to be weak. And that really stuck with me. The fact that it's okay to be weak, that you go through this trauma and it's okay to not have the answers, not hold it all together all the time. Um, I think that's important. And I think it's hard for people to find an outlet for that in a way that's healthy. Um, One thing that has helped me is I have a Spotify playlist that has songs that are guaranteed to make me cry. And I will go for long car rides and put it on and just bawl when I'm on the interstate. Um, get my little windshield wipers on my eyes, but like just let it out in a healthy way. Um, but no matter what good you can see in a short life, there's always going to be an equal amount of bad, and that's just the reality of it. And I think acceptance goes a long way to being able to cope with it.
Or was there something different in your upbringing? Were your parents open with their emotions? Were they able to connect with, in some people say that the Jewish experience of suffering has a lot of lamenting, a lot of finding like comedy in the midst of suffering and connecting with a higher power to give us resilience. Were any of those factors part of your life story?
It could be. I think there's some truth to that, but I couldn't tell you whether that's part of my personality, where it came from. I will tell you, I'm married to a remarkable woman who is the strongest person I know and is a really wonderful counterbalance to me and my personality. And I think that's important. That being said, I know that, there are people who are not as lucky to have that. And that's not a judgment call on them, but that you need to have a partner to be strong. I don't think that's necessary. Um, but yeah, I think there's something in Judaism which acknowledges sadness. You know, when you get married, you smash a glass. When you have the challah on Friday night, you know, you put salt on it. That sadness is a part of life, and we acknowledge it, and we don't hide from it, and we soldier on, and we make sure there's as much joy as there is sadness, and maybe those two things balance each other out. And if they don't, at least you've done the best you could to, to find the joy in the world. Like I feel that very strongly in Judaism, that one of our jobs on this earth is to uncover the joy within everything you encounter. Um, and and that's maybe not a common Jewish thought, but to me, that's a very Jewish thought, is that there's goodness in the world that you need to discover and unlock as best you can. And that probably has informed how I've approached we went through with our son.
So I have a funny story, and then we're gonna discuss your son's life and everything you guys went through. So, some very respectable doctor comes to Houston, and she's giving a presentation on memento mori, which is the medieval idea of making peace with God before you die and thinking about all the things that you did wrong and kind of preparing someone for death and all this stuff. And she's from New York and she's bragging that all the Jews she's ever met are very comfortable with death and they have all these beautiful rituals and they do all these things. And I go up to her at the end of the presentation and I say, well, that's interesting that it's so amazing in that part of the country. When I try to talk about the dying process, about making preparations, about not leaving burdens behind before you pass with the Jewish community here, they all run away and they don't discuss death, very similar to I grew up, where if you talk about death, you're bringing it onto yourself. And she's looked at me and she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And that was it. So have you experienced that maybe there's different regional ways that people address what we are all heading to? And especially with pediatric death, it's even more scary and more difficult to even fathom. Um, what I've noticed is that a lot of it brings about our own mortality to even discuss it with our relatives. So it's still a taboo for a lot of people.
Yeah, there's no question that losing a child makes you face your own mortality, 100%. Like I think that's very, very true for everybody in the family, not just the parents. I mean, I can't speak for his brothers, but I suspect that it forces you to grow up and confront things that other people may not need to confront until much later in life. Um, I think doctors have a hard time with it. I think it's an awkward thing for doctors to handle. I think they have to be very wary of not being too emotional, but I think they also know that they need to be supportive of families, and I think where that really comes into stark. Relief is when a child that they care for dies and they have to decide about whether they, go to the memorial service or how they deal with the family. We were very touched that when our son died, there were two nurses who came up from Philadelphia to be there for the Shiva. That was really meaningful for us. There was another doctor who came, but there were other doctors who didn't, and I didn't want to judge them for not being there. I know they cared, but I just think it's an awkward thing for them to deal with, and I think that maybe a private thing they have to deal with too. It's very hard for me to know what other people go through because I'm not really going out there interviewing people about their experiences. Um, but I can sense the awkwardness when I do give talks where people don't want to confront it. But I think certainly if you're a pediatric specialist in any sort of specialty field, it is something that you're going to have to confront and deal with. And parents can pick up on that sometimes when it's awkward. And I think where it really affects the relationship is when doctors can't be honest about outcomes, that there are possible outcomes which are negative, that they cannot talk honestly with parents about. And I have a lot of empathy for having to break that news, but I do think that parents have to be informed about reality of the situation when the situation demands it.
So we started backwards. We started talking about grief and the people process grief. Now let's go to the life of your son and how he impacted you guys and the you learn, including all of how we're created and the way that families come together to support each other through such an experience.
Yeah. So you just want me to walk through our story real quick? Yeah.
It's whatever you feel comfortable with.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I wrote a book about it, so I'm comfortable with everything, but I know our time is limited, so I'm not going to take too much time. Um, our son was born with a heart defect that was caused by something called primary ciliary dyskinesia, which basically means that the cilia in your body don't work, these tiny hairs. The reason it affected him was because when you're an embryo, there are these tiny cilia on the outside of the embryo which beat the amniotic fluid around in a swirl that determines how your organs form. And if they're not working quite right, your organs form haphazardly, and that's what happened with our son. The thought that that even happens at all was kind of like it blew my mind that that's how our bodies form. Like there's so many incredible things that have to do with growing and healing that we don't realize until something goes wrong. And so when I talk about the wonder that I encountered during his life, that's part of it. It makes you realize just how incredible life really is when you have to sort of stare death in the face. His heart condition required three surgeries before the age of 4. The first one only 5 days old. That was terrifying because it makes you realize how little you know. I didn't know whether these would be a success or whether he'd live or die. And we were forced to balance our newfound expertise as medical professionals with our responsibilities as his parents to give him a normal life. And so we did that as much as possible by traveling. We just explored the world as best we could. The world in our neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York. We took a road trip to North Carolina. We flew to the West Coast. Him and his brothers had a great time in each of those things. I like to think that he was able to be a normal kid when we were doing that, aside from the fact that he had this heart condition. And then with the opportunity to go to Australia, which is a country that we loved, um, and this was right after his third surgery, and we weren't really sure whether we should do it, and we hemmed and hawed, and eventually we decided to do it in consultation with his doctors. And it was an amazing trip until 2 days before he was supposed to come home, and he was diagnosed with a clot in circulation that required emergency surgery, um, which was not great because he came out in really bad shape. And we found ourselves stranded on the other side of the world um, with our son in critical condition, being cared for by people we didn't know. And I know you're interested in faith. It was an interesting moment actually when he got out of surgery because he was on this machine called an ECMO machine. It's a heart-lung machine. And we called his cardiologist in New York, who we were very, very close to. And we're Jewish and she's Hindu. He said, I'm praying for you. And I was very curious about what that meant to a Hindu person. I said, who are you praying to? Which gods? She said, all of them. It was like a full spectrum blast. And I said, well, you have to pick just one. Who would it be? She said, Hanuman, the monkey god. And I don't think she said this for that reason, but our son was on this heart lung machine. His chest was open. And if you Google Hanuman, the monkey god, you'll see that he is often depicted as holding his chest open. And inside there are the two deities he's sworn to protect, Rama and Sita. And it was nice at that moment to have that point of connection of faith. They were very different faiths, but we both knew that there was something beyond our understanding that we had to wrestle with, and we were wrestling with in our own way. And I think that is part of the human condition that you wrestle with things of the unknown by having faith, whatever that means to you. And we certainly did. And he rewarded that faith. He he uh, he lived through that night. He he survived, even though the odds were against him. He was still in critical condition. We had to find some way home. Eventually, we found um, a doctor in the States who was doing a procedure that might be able to help him. And he was airlifted home in this crazy medical evacuation. Not home. He was airlifted to Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, where they were doing some new procedures that could help him. So he did this crazy flight back to the States. Spent 6 months in Philadelphia, where he recuperated, and eventually we made our way home. He was not cured. Um, there's virtually no cure for his condition. The only hope was to get him to teenage years where he might be eligible for transplant. He was in such bad shape that was not a possibility. So we weren't under any illusions about his condition. Um, After we got back to Brooklyn, he went to kindergarten. It was an incredible experience that this kid who'd been around the world with all his cardiac issues was able to sort of be a normal kid in kindergarten. welcomed in by his teacher and his classmates. Just a beautiful thing. And then that January he died. Um, and I had to tell his brothers that he had died. I had to cope with it myself. And I realized when I held up my arms that night that he died, I felt all sorts of emotions. I felt pain, sadness, grief. But the emotion I felt most of all was pride. As a parent, you live for these moments of pride. Getting married, having kids. Um, we knew that for our son, none of this would happen. But I felt as many moments of pride in his 5 years as most parents feel in a lifetime. And we learned to measure life not in years, but in miracles. And like I said earlier, his life opened my eyes to a lot of things that I had never considered were possible, and forced me to reckon with things that were beyond my understanding. And to do that, you have to recognize the limits of your understanding, limits of what you can know. The fact that we're human, there are things that we will never know, and reckon with it in a really real way. And in my mind at least, I could either go crazy or I could try to make sense of it. So I've done my best since then to try and make sense of it. That's why I write, talk, and meet people, try to find some meaning in what to me is still a very baffling thing, why we live and why we die. And I don't think we're ever going to understand those things because we're human.
So in grief work, we talk about meaning making. Also talk about glimmers of hope. We see a lot of people not being able to come out of a dark place because they struggle to see the beauty, the good things that are around. When my sister-in-law died tragically, I was scared to be around my wife's family because every time they talked about her, they talked about her death and how horrible it was. And 20 years later, they still struggle to talk about her. What do you think is different with you being able to talk about the beautiful times and the ongoing? Maybe it is that the difference that she died suddenly and unexpected. Um, so you said that you feel like it was a blessing that you had every moment could count and every ex could be seen as an opportunity.
Um, yeah. Um, what's I going to say about this? I think in terms of making meaning from it, it's just how I've chosen to do it. My wife doesn't talk about this stuff at all, mainly. She won't talk publicly about it, not because she's bad or wrong or anything. It's just how she copes with it, and this is how I cope with it. I guess I have to make meaning from it. My son's not here, and talking about it allows me to conjure him here with you, and hopefully other people will benefit from his life. The part of the reason I give talks to doctors at children's hospitals is I want them to become better doctors. And if his life and our experience helps them become better doctors, then that's a very gratifying thing for me. People often ask me, is it really hard to get up and talk about it? I'm like, no, it's great. It's a joy for me because I get to spend 45 minutes with our son and I get to introduce people he's never met and he gets to change their lives, hopefully, maybe in a small way. But to me, that's meaning, right? It means that that experience was not meaningless. But I'm not going to judge people who don't have to do that to make meaning from it. That's just my way of doing it. And it's about the only thing I can do. So I keep doing it.
And what about small ways to memorialize him, such as eating his meal, watching his favorite show? What is your family that it is almost like a ritual that would kind of conjure him in another way?
He had very unique tastes. I don't know if it's something about his condition or what, but he was a very unique individual, a real character, one of a kind in a lot of different ways. And one of that was that he had very strong opinions about what he ate. He didn't like ice cream. He's probably the only kid on earth who doesn't like ice cream. He would spit it out. He would not eat chocolate ice cream, which is bad because we need to get him bigger. He needed to be as big as possible to survive these surgeries. So we tried to give him fattening foods, and he just would not like ice cream. So that was a no go. But he really liked things with strong flavors. He liked pepper. So every night every Friday night we have the challah as part of our Shabbat Kiddush, and instead of most people use salt to season the challah, we use pepper to remember him. He loved oregano; that was his favorite herb. And one of the things I do for readers of my book, and in fact, maybe your listeners are interested in this as well, um, is I actually give everybody I meet tiny packets of oregano seeds that they can then plant and enjoy oregano on his behalf. And all I ask is if they grow something, they send me a photo of it, which is nice because I get photos of oregano from all over the place, these random photos, which is really gratifying. And anybody who wants one can go to my website, morethanmemoir.com/oregano, and ask me for an oregano packet, and I'll happily send it. These are the small things that help him or help hopefully continue to spread his energy throughout the world and help us remember him.
So, um, we were watching different footage about Michael Jackson and how he connected with kids at the burn unit when he had an accident. Um, have you guys done anything to um, support or engage with kids who are also experiencing heart conditions?
I haven't actually done a whole lot with families in hospitals. Like obviously there are other people in our orbit that we know that we try to support, but most of my work is working with doctors and clinicians and therapists and child life people and people who are caring for kids in the hospital and helping them understand the parent perspective and what's helpful and what's not, and actually open their eyes to things that are possible or important they may not have thought of. One of those things is um, using our names when talking to us. I think that when you are a doctor partnering with a family, it's really important to recognize each other's humanity. That parents have to understand that doctors are not magicians or gods, that they too wrestle with the unknown, that there are things that they don't know and can't predict. And I think doctors have to realize that parents have medical expertise that's important in care, and they have to partner with them. And to do that, they have to treat them as with respect. So I'm a strong believer that they have to use parents' names or preferred forms of address when they're talking with parents. Um, we're not mom and dad. Like my wife and I are not mom and dad to our own kids. We're Abba and Ema. And if we're going to work with a doctor or somebody in the hospital, I'm James. Like I want to be called James. And so these are the sorts of things that I talk to doctors about. And it's sort of like this light bulb goes on in their heads, like, oh, that's why it's important. Um, and they say that it changes how they practice medicine, which is pretty gratifying. But hopefully that's indirectly helping other families. We haven't done a whole lot um, of family outreach, although I do talk a lot to other parents in similar situations. Um, but I'm not in a clinical setting. I wouldn't go visit the hospital, I don't think. I mean, I could, but it's just not how I spend my time.
It's interesting that at the beginning of the interview and now you mentioned that parents are medical caregivers themselves. I always tell families that the parent or the loved one who's by the side or even the patient themselves, they're the person that knows their condition the best and that they need to take ownership and advocate for themselves because they have clear vision of what's going on as compared to people who are coming in and out and looking at charts and stuff like that. Um, and then working in palliative care and hospice, um, a lot of times the parents are the ones doing all the work, and the nurse only comes once a week. And that's like the biggest hidden sell point of hospice is that they don't tell you that it's all on you
Right.
and that they support you. Um, do you think that that's a disservice to the family not to see them as part of the team? And
I can't speak to hospice specifically because that's not part of our experience, but certainly in a hospital, I think yes, they have to recognize that parents have an expertise that they lack, right? There are things that we know about our son medically, how he's going to react to certain things that they may not know, right? Um, we've been with him every day, like they may have only known him for a week, right? Like that's super important. But I think it's a lot to ask of parents to sort of like step into that role without being given explicit support or permission to do so, right? I think a lot of times doctors there's an adversarial relationship where the parent has to sort of like fight for that respect. For us, it was when we came off the plane to Philadelphia, we wanted our son Nadav to be able to have ice chips because his throat was parched. This is a kid who's intubated, and they would not let us do it. And we're like, he can handle it. We know from Australia that he can do this, and it's really important to him. And it took like a week-long tug of war to come to some compromise on it. That's incredibly draining as a parent to have to go through that to sort of earn that respect. And I know that doctors deal with a lot of different people and a lot of different expertise in a lot of different situations. So I'm not going to begrudge them that. But I do think there should be a conscious empowerment for parents to feel welcomed into the conversation instead of having to fight their way into the conversation, which I think happens a lot of the time.
And I've seen situations where somebody's crying or they're having a very difficult conversation with them, and none of the clinical people that we consider clinical, which are social workers, child life, or chaplains, are called to be part of the conversation.
Mm.
If you were having a conversation that it was very difficult and of end of life, would you want people that might not have met but have ability to support you emotionally to be there? Or would you rather just talk directly to the doctors and deal with that type of support later?
It's hard to because there's all sorts of personalities in a hospital. I think in some cases we'd want certain people there, and we wouldn't want certain people because so much of it is how your personalities match. But I will tell you what it's like to be in the family room when you're being told that your child's going to die. And it's often not a pleasant experience because what happened with us was usually when that happened, you'd be sitting in a room with your spouse, and across from you would be like a couple of dozen people who you didn't know, standing there with their arms crossed, looking grim. All we had was a box of tissues. There's a lot of power dynamics in that situation, right? And if people are going to be in the room, I kind of want to know who they are and why they're there, and you don't always know that, right? Um, I do think that social workers, child life people play an incredibly important role in care, both for the child and the family, because they bring the humanity. That's their job. Their job is to make this a human endeavor, I think, which doctors can't always do. And I think certainly, yeah, if there's somebody with expertise who you trust and respect, they should be part of those conversations because that's really important. It's not just about the medical situation, it's about life and what life means. And this gets into palliative care. But um, as long as it's done in a way which is not overwhelming and confusing and baffling, where you feel outnumbered, I think having other people in the room is fine. That being said, we did develop like a lot of trust with certain doctors, one of whom told us sort of off the cuff that he had, 6 to 9 months to live in like a very casual setting in the hallway. And because we trusted her, we respected her, that didn't feel like the wrong thing to do. So I think these things are so idiosyncratic that it's hard to give blanket advice. But I think it's just about treating the other person with the sort of respect that you would treat anybody else with, um, and often not just sort of as a victim, but as a peer. I think that's important.
And the reason I bring up chaplains is because, in my experience, Christian patients are way more open to talk than Jewish, Hindu, um, Buddhist, and other faiths, because I feel that especially the Jewish community is very practical. I came to get medical attention. I didn't come to talk to a rabbi or
Right.
to talk about my emotions. I appreciate you saying that we bring the human component of it, but it's more intertwined with healthcare functions because they have Christian doctors and they have Christian hospitals and stuff like that. And I don't know how it is in Jewish hospitals, but um, do you think that we have more segmented mentality in the Jewish community, that if I wanted someone who has spiritual expertise, I would call on them versus someone just showing up at your door and saying, "Hey, I'm here. You want to talk about how does faith impact your health and how health impacts your faith?" Does that seem a little foreign for?
To be honest, it did for us. Like we did not develop strong relationships with any of the chaplains, Jewish or otherwise, in any of the places that we were at. I think maybe because we had that spiritual support elsewhere, and sometimes we had it within ourselves, right? Or with each other. Um, so we actually did not take advantage of chaplaincy, in part because I think like personalities are somehow more important than roles some places. You just find the people who get you and you cling to them. If they're a social worker or if they're a respiratory therapist or if they're a pulmonologist, you just kind of like find these people who you just mesh with and you can trust, right? And in our case, that was just like it didn't happen to be the chaplain, but it didn't mean it couldn't have been if the situations have been different or the personalities have been different. Um, I do know that like the Jewish charities that helped us, that help was valuable. To know that we had a community that supported us, that was behind us, even though we were strangers, but supported us because we were part of the group, was hugely important. To have like we don't keep strictly kosher, but to have kosher meals provided to us was actually really nice, especially if the food was good, which was not always the case. But it was nice to know that somebody cared about like giving you food that you actually could eat without guilt, right? Was good, or a place to stay. That was invaluable. Like in Philadelphia, when we first arrived, the only place to stay we had was provided by a Jewish charity. Um, so I think faith is not just spiritual, like you said, it's practical. And maybe I'm just assuming it's practical because that's been my tradition, my upbringing. That could well be. Um, but I do know there's a place for faith in the hospital environment, loosely defined, because that's part of being human too. And you are wrestling with unknown things. And when you wrestle with unknown things, you have to have a little bit of faith, religious or otherwise, that somehow you're going to make it through.
So my professor, who was a of Abraham Joshua Heschel, was struggling with cancer, and he said that they sent this random rabbi with a loaf of bread and a bottle of wine at him and said, "I can't eat, I can't drink. What are you doing?" And so I've seen in some circles that a lot of times calling a rabbi is like calling a priest, like it's a formality, but that might not be what you need at that time.
Hmm.
Did these charities have a rabbi that was involved? Because one of the best Jewish charities I ever seen is it was Israeli charity that Israeli patients, and half of the family was secular, half of them were religious, and it was the ceremonial showing up with the rabbi, but you saw more warmth and you saw support from the secular Israelis from this big religious figure.
Right. Yeah. No, we didn't. Like I said, we didn't really deal with chaplaincy during our stay there. The one time we really needed a rabbi, honestly, was the night he died. Um, and we just needed to know what to do. And we we knew there was a right thing to do from our traditions, and we'd never had to do it before, so we had to know what that was.
But did
And yeah,
show up and take over, or did they give you tools and assistance in a way that was helpful?
the information was passed through a third party because it was very late at night. But but how do I put this? Like the machine kind of took over. Like we were on the radar and we were just taking care. Like here, it was proactively given to us in a very non-obtrusive way, which I was grateful for. The irony of the night he died was there was no social worker on call. So there's nobody from a secular perspective to tell us what to do, which was even more of a problem. But like I said, the Jewish rituals around death are very practical, so that kind of helps smooth that over a little bit.
And the connecting with the funeral home and the whole process of transporting his remains, was that awkward and difficult, or was the hospital pretty good at making it as seamless as possible?
I can't remember even dealing with it. Maybe that's because my wife took over and dealt with it, but I don't think that's what happened. I think the community just steps in and it's like, here's what you need to do. Here are the decisions you need to make. Here's what we're going to take care of. Here's what you don't need to worry about. And in fact, the person at the funeral home who stayed overnight watching the body, as you know, that's important. Um, Turns out he shared a birthday with Nadav, so he felt a personal connection. And and even though we barely met him, he made sure that he reached out and let us know how much he cared about our family and our situation. Um, and I think knowing that even strangers will step in for you when you need it most is one of the things I was talking about earlier about the essential goodness of humanity, which I actually happen to believe because we've seen it from people. Um, and like I said, it's just a tragedy that takes these horrible situations to bring that out. It would be nice if we saw the world as best every day. This is a normal matter, of course, but unfortunately we don't.
How do you have gone about spreading your message and have opportunities to share your story? Has it been an organic thing, or has any organization come looking for you to connect you with the right people?
Both things happen. I get organizations reaching out to me, um, wanting to talk or wanting to invite me to talk. I have these wonderful conversations, and this book has been a real gift because it's introduced me to all sorts of incredible people, just like we're having right now, or we had when we met in Houston, um, about things that I might not have considered. Most people go on book tours to sell books. I have a book because it allows me to go on a book tour. And I have these wonderful conversations, and I learn from other people about things that I care deeply about, which is this topic and its related topics. And then whenever I'm finished the conversation, I say, who else should I meet? And then people say, oh, you should meet Joe, or you should meet Jane. And I'll say, why? And they're like, oh, it's not exactly the same as our conversation, but they have an interesting perspective. And so that leads to all sorts of interesting places, um, speaking opportunities, but also interesting people. Like about a month ago, I met a person who was partially responsible for inventing clown doctors, starting the clown doctor organization. I think they're actually hugely important, clown doctors. And we talked for like 2 hours about clown doctors and how important that is in pediatric care. And it was just like I learned so much and I made a wonderful connection. And now I've been introduced to the world of clown doctors. I'm meeting all these clown doctors now. I'm meeting one next week. And it's just incredible. So it's a little bit organic, but it's mainly me going to seek out interesting conversations and seeing what results.
So I know two Jewish comedians, and I was telling them after talking to you that we need to start clown rabbis
Plenty of rabbis are clowns already.
because it's so hard to keep people engaged. And now we're dealing with the TikTok generation that kids fall asleep during the sermons, and nobody wants to hear long, drawn out Hebrew services. So we might be up to something.
The
Um,
interesting thing about clown
and
doctors is they make you laugh, and that's something you need to do as a human, and I think you need to do it as heel. So I don't know if that. I mean, I've heard plenty of rabbis try to tell jokes, but I don't know if it really always works as well as the professionals.
and then the legacy of your son with your other children. We talked a little bit about it in person, but um, my wife and her sister were devastated by losing their 25-year-old sister. In 20 years for my wife to be able to process her grief. Um, and a lot of it is losing control, losing a sense of safety, uh, feeling that, kind of like what bad things happen to good people. Do you have any concerns or um, looking in the future that your kids might need some therapy or some type of tools to be able to process and keep honoring your other son?
So I can't speak for them. They were very young when he died. His twin brother was 5. His older brother was 9. His older brother's now 18, and his twin is 14. So they're teenagers. So that affects communication. Not sure if you were ever 14 or 18, but I'm sure you know, like it's not always they're not always most willing to talk about things at that age. Um, I will. There's a couple of principles that I live by to help, guide my own behavior when it comes to or my own approach to parenting. One is, and this is something we did from the very beginning, is to be completely honest with them about everything. And when Nadav was born and alive, that was being totally honest about his condition. And at a given moment, try to explain it to them, not hide it, because kids imagine things. And now I think it's being honest about my emotions and making sure that I'm modeling good behavior about being able to share what I'm feeling. Because even if they're not ready to talk yet, um, I want them to feel that we have that opportunity to communicate as when the time is right. I wrote the book in many ways so that they, when they're old enough to understand it, really understand what I went through as his father, and what I learned as a father. So hopefully that helps them. Um, and then I try to be as patient as possible. And that's not always easy. Um, I grow a lot of plants. We have this garden where I grow a lot of things, not just oregano. And I think the analogy is like growing plants. Like plants need certain things. They need water. They need light. Um, Sometimes they need shade. Um, they need soil. But giving the plant more of those things is not going to make it grow any faster. The thing that it needs most of all is time and patience. Um, And I like to approach parenting, and I don't always succeed, but I like to approach parenting in that same way, is to be patient with my kids and let them grow into whatever they need to grow into, and let me be there to provide the light and water and soil as they need it. Um, so not always successful, but that's how I try to approach it.
In the last 4 minutes, can you tell us about your amazing trip to Australia with your son, Nadav, and how that was challenging and very rewarding at the same time?
Well, I feel I've already told you the story. I mean, it was challenging because you developed a blood clot down there, needed emergency surgery, right? It was, and then we were stuck there for 3 months until this crazy evacuation brought us home with his brothers, by the way. We were stuck there. Um, what was amazing about it is that, it's sort of being stuck in hospital there opened our eyes to another way of medicine that we hadn't considered. One of the things the doctors did for us in Australia is they made a point of bringing him outside as much as possible, which was crazy because this is a critically ill kid who's intubated, you know, um, clinging to life. And they brought him with a travel ventilator down to the playground so he could watch his brothers play and feel the wind in his hair and touch leaves and smell flowers. That was an incredible gift. Not just out of pity or palliative care, but because it 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 recognized that to heal is a human thing. And, if you're gonna heal, you've got to feel human. Being outside is part of being human, not stuck in a sterile environment. And that's something we tried to take with us when we got back to the States, the idea of being outside. Um, and it's something that I try to share with clinicians now. I try to convince them that you need to find ways to bring kids outside, no matter the logistical challenges and the legal challenges. You have to find a way to get them into the fresh air because that's hugely important, not just for the children, but the families.
So the original trip was taken because you guys wanted to enjoy life, and even though he was medically fragile, you wanted him to see that part of the world, correct?
As a country we loved, and we loved it. It was great that he went. And when he was down there, I know it's terrible circumstances, but he met all sorts of incredible people, and they got to know him. And because I'm a human being, I don't know if that was the right decision. I don't know if we'd stayed in New York, whether he would have developed the same condition. I don't know if the surgeon in Australia was better than the surgeon in New York. I don't know any of those things. So it's very hard for me to look back and say, oh, it was the right decision or the wrong decision. It was just a human decision. And there's limits to what we can know and make our peace with what transpired.
Did
Luckily,
anybody share through your journey that as long as it's done in a loving way, that every decision that you make is the correct?
um, yeah, I mean, I think if you are informed as much as you can be with the knowledge you have and you deliberate and think things through, then you can only make the best decisions you can. I mean, I don't think my wife and I make rash decisions. Um, but yeah, you don't know how things are going to turn out. That's true of any parenting decision, large and small. You have to sort of embrace chaos and understand that you can't predict where anybody's life is going to go or where it may lead. And you have to be comfortable with that and accept it, I think.
Well, I often tell parents that having a child is an act of faith, and then living as for a lot and like patience. So we want to thank you for sharing your story, for the work that you do, for giving people the tools and the understanding that, like you said, might give them an opportunity to make a difference in someone's life. And that's what it's all about. So we're very fortunate to have you on our show and to have met you in person. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
the feeling is mutual. Thanks for that. And I also want to remind your listeners, if they want to hear more about our story, the book is More Than We Expected. The website is morethanAmemoir.com. And then I also have a TED Talk, which was just published, where I sort of go in more depth about some things we've talked about today. So that's all available if anybody wants to hear it.
Thank you. Have a good night, and thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you.